Good day and welcome to another episode of The Big Opportunity, sponsored by Church of St. John the Divine here in Houston, Texas. This is a video conversation series in which we are engaging with church leaders and Christian observers from all over, asking the question that in light of the challenges that congregations face today, where is the opportunity? My name is Leigh Spruill. I'm your host. Thank you for joining us. My guest today is joining us from just west of London in the UK, Steve Cockram. I would describe Steve as a serial entrepreneur, an international speaker, best-selling author, and a professional coach for top-level executives and their teams throughout the world. He's co-founder of a company called Giant, by the way, one of the fastest-growing tech companies in the United States. Their vision is to unlock the potential of people everywhere in organizations around the world. I encourage you to learn more about Steve and his work. You can go to his website, www.stevecockram.com. He's married to Helen. They have 3 beautiful girls. And in the interest of personal disclosure, I should share that Steve has been a dear friend of mine, as well as someone who's been immensely influential in my own leadership for the last 15 years. Steve, thank you so much for joining us today.
Wow, Leigh, thank you. I always love my American introductions. It's kind of as Brits, we're not used to people saying such lovely things. So I appreciate it and grateful for the opportunity to share today.
Well, I'm grateful too. I think that our viewers should know this also about you, that you're a devoted Christian with experience in a congregational setting before your current work. And I wonder, in light of leadership conversations that you've been having with so many over the last year and a half, how you would identify opportunities before local congregations today.
And I think the other thing to say to you is you'll be thrilled to hear, I'm actually more involved in the leadership of local church now than I've been for many years. So all the joys of being part of, I'm even preaching on Sunday, so I must be official, Leigh. So in terms of opportunity for congregations, I mean, I know COVID has hit the world in different ways, and American lockdown is not the same as everywhere else. But I would say that in the conversations I'm having, that the sense of people desiring connection, community, belonging, I think that in some ways COVID forced people to deal with their own isolation, and in some senses their own sense of, well, where do I belong, and where does my life have meaning? And I think there's probably more openness, maybe less so to kind of, am I seeking truth? But I think people are looking for, where is there authentic, meaningful community and relational opportunities? And in some senses, the churches that grasp that will happen not just in the sanctuary on Sunday, but actually in the smaller groups that often meet in homes as extended families. I would say there's a huge opportunity right now to be actually relevant at people's, what I call their painkiller, not their vitamin level. Church is often like a vitamin. It's a nice to have, I really ought to go. But actually, when someone has a migraine or a toothache, they will get the treatment needed. And I think there's an element of loneliness and an element of desire for community and connection, which is a real, almost at the painkiller need for those who are able to offer that. And in many ways go after what that means. It's always costly running community. It's always more costly than it is sometimes running events, but that's another story.
Yeah, the hunger for meaningful connections and community. I wonder how you have seen that manifested in your local congregation there, again, west of London, or talking to other church leaders. And I wonder also if you might speak to why, this is a conversation about opportunity, but why that particular opportunity presents a challenge for a lot of congregations.
I think, the reason why it's challenging is it requires, I think, us as ordinary Christians, not superhuman Christians like you, Leigh, you preach on Sundays in big churches, to actually ask the question is, what is it that I'm prepared to make uncomfortable in my life? So in a sense, when you read those kind of summary passages in Acts 2 and Acts 4, where it talks about, they shared everything in common, they ate together every day, they prayed, they met. My belief is that actually those things you can't make them happen. They're actually an outpouring of the Holy Spirit as the dunamis, as it were, the dynamite of dynamic community. So in a sense, the opportunity is there, but the challenge is there for many of us because a lot of us are actually quite comfortable running our own lives and with Christianity as part of who we are. And community forces a level usually of vulnerability and openness and transparency, which is uncomfortable for most people. But actually, it's one of the things that the Holy Spirit does in those that are full of the Holy Spirit. You end up with dynamic community as an outcome of being full of the Holy Spirit. You can't not be those people, but it's really hard to commit to do it out of a sense of duty, obligation, or trying to persuade people that you really should lead a community in the church. So I think that's where the opportunity is, but I think it's also the challenge, if we're honest, because in the end, sometimes we prefer the professionals to run church rather than owning the fact that actually we're called to be those, ambassadors and those people for whom the Holy Spirit has access in and through us to that community. I say that as someone who's deeply challenged by that. So rather than sharing it out of a sense of I've got this sorted. So.
Well, we have a number of church leaders who will be watching this conversation, and a lot of folks who may not perceive themselves as church leaders, members of our congregation, other congregations. I want to just continue this bit of our dialogue and ask, what would you say by way of some practical tips or advice to people who are unused to leading church in their homes? Where to start?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's a phrase which says, if you take meal times and mountains out of the Bible, you have about 50 pages left. So in a sense, a lot of people get worried of thinking, I have to run mini church and I'm not theologically skilled, and how would I know how to answer questions? Well, I think the thing that if people's desire to feel at home, hospitality is a gift. And so few people open their home and invite people into their home, because obviously in certain parts of America, the home has to be perfect before you'd ever dare open it. And the sense of fear that you will be, uncovered as not having the perfect cushions or whatever it might be. So the ability to invite people into the ordinariness of your home and to share a meal with them, and to what we would say be interested, not trying to be too interesting first, because your desire is to create an environment around your family home, whether it's a grill or a meal or just, a glass of something on the back deck, is to begin to make people feel they can belong. If you simply open your home and had dinner with your, say, team of 4 to 5 people twice a month, and you committed to just get to know each other really well, share a little bit about what God's put on your heart, give a chance to pray together around a simple meal, you will find it will dramatically change the dynamics of relationships, because there's something amazing happens around a meal table. And when people are willing to open their home, is opening something of their own vulnerability, in my experience.
Oh, you said so many good things there, but just really appreciate the call to simple hospitality. And especially as so many congregations all over the world, certainly in my context, are struggling to figure out how to reopen, to regather as we, God willing, come out of the coronavirus. Are you observing both in your own, again, local congregation there in England, as well as in conversation with other leaders, any patterns about how unstuck how churches that are stuck can get unstuck and move into, again, a season of thriving rather than just trying to maintain or go back to survival mode?
I think for me, when anyone asks me that question, I say, if you go back to first principles, that actually the type of community and the type of life that Jesus calls us to is not possible because we will it to happen. It is actually a work of the Holy Spirit in us that then impacts families, communities, and church. So in a sense, when people are struggling to know how to do this, there's a very dangerous prayer called Come Holy Spirit. And actually it's a prayer that he will answer, but it's you have to be careful, because the word dunamis, as you know, is the word dynamite. And when the Holy Spirit comes, nothing quite remains the same. So I would say, for any church asking, how do I re-engage my people? How do I re-engage community? Rather than start with the program, start with actually the belief that actually when the Holy Spirit fills a community of believers, the overflow of that is always the bold proclamation of truth, that actually the signs and wonders of the kingdom, and always an incredible sense of care for people.
Steve, that's, again, so helpful. We could do no better than to return to the end of the second chapter of the book of Acts for a vision of what church can be for us, again, in these challenging times that are rife with so many fresh opportunities. Avoid the default to former programmatic mode, and let's begin with first principles.
It's not programs the wrongly. So if you think about it, the church ended up creating programs because they ended up with ridiculous growth. But actually what they did was they allowed, in some ways, to decide what the Holy Spirit was doing in and amongst them, and then they responded to that. My default, let's be honest about this, is to decide how the program is going to work and then ask the Holy Spirit to bless it. And I think that for me is like whenever there is a reset, and let's be honest, this has been a huge moment where the ways we've always done things, or certainly have in my lifetime, we couldn't do them for 18 months. And I think the other thing I say is that we're learning as a community here, how do we learn to use the power of the technology that we learned almost through necessity, and not just simply automatically assume one is right, one is wrong. So how can we use the connectedness that's possible with technology while also reincorporating the best of actually being gathered? So I think that's the other thing that I would say is some people are just desperate to get back to all being together. But in some ways, there are things that have happened in the capacity of leaders and communities where you don't automatically gather everyone all back together again by default as the assumption. So that's, different people will use it in different ways, but don't lose what you learned in pandemic about how technology gives us scale, connection. Look at the programs or the things that you feel called to run. How can technology play a part? Because we live in a world now which is more digitally connected than ever before, and it's never going to go away. And there are opportunities as well as challenges in that.
Steve, you're such a wise and articulate voice, and I could talk to you for ages. Thank you so very much for those thoughts and for being our guest today.
Pleasure, Leigh. Thank you so much.
And thanks to everyone for watching this episode of The Big Opportunity. You could subscribe to this on our YouTube channel, and you'll be notified for each successive episode. Thank you again. Good day.